of colonialism is, of course, inherently tied to its themes of violence, masculinity, and cruelty. It's exactly for those reasons, though, that I have historically found colonialism to be a very difficult subject to engage with on an academic level. Often, I've found that retellings of global colonialism prioritize the stories of masculinity and violence in a way that is not as engaging or interesting to me. And so, in this video essay, I will be analyzing 2 films from female directors that pertain to the subject of Portuguese colonialism. I'm interested in the way that female directors utilize filmmaking as a tool for decentering the male gaze in colonial history, and instead recentering the female gaze, which effectively recontextualizes the atrocities from a subaltern perspective. But first, a little bit of context is necessary. The subaltern perspective refers to celebrated sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos. He was the first to astutely articulate Portuguese colonialism as, quote, subaltern. Santos utilizes the characters of Prospero and Caliban in Shakespeare's The Tempest to describe the relations between Portugal and its colonies. At first, the characters assume a father-son dynamic, but as the play continues, the dynamic becomes more explicitly that between a master and a slave. And now, a brief summary of the country's respective cinema. The highly acclaimed Brazilian-style cinema novo emerged in the 1950s and 60s, inspired by Italian neorealism and French New Wave. The military dictatorship in Brazil brought trouble for the film industry, but afterwards it was commercialized and continues to be highly rewarded and regarded today. Portuguese cinema has a far more commercial history. Emerging in the late 20th century, it blossomed onto international film festivals and has routinely won many awards. Acosta dos Muymeros, or The Murmuring Coast in English, is a 1960s period piece set in Mozambique towards the end of Portuguese rule. It's directed by a woman named Margarida Cardoso, a filmmaker who studied communication arts at school in Lisbon. She worked for several years as a photographer and assistant director in France and Portugal until she started writing her own movies in 1995. Her films are particularly interested in her own personal history and uncovering the legacy of Portuguese colonial rule. The lead character is a woman named Evita. Immediately, we see that this film is interested in decentering the male gaze by centering a female protagonist. Furthermore, the editing and cinematography make it abundantly clear that this film is assuming the female gaze, and we are watching it through the protagonist's eyes. It's the 1960s, and Portuguese-ruled Mozambique, and Evita is recently married to her lieutenant husband. Her eyes are the ones through which we witness the events of the film. And it's exactly this female perspective that allows for a more evocative, contemplative, and nuanced perspective of both gender and racial tensions in this era. The female perspective is more gradual and emotive, and because of this, the plot gets turned on its head and becomes how violence corrupts men and the danger of masculine power. Furthermore, it's crucial to understand that it is through a white woman's eyes which we are witnessing the events that are occurring. This, at times, problematic gaze allows for a far more complex portrait to be painted of power dynamics in colonial history. Therefore, in this retelling, Cardoso effectively utilizes the male characters as vehicles for expressing brutality as opposed to stature and power. By witnessing their acts through a complacent yet hesitant and learning eye, the viewer becomes familiarized with a perspective that is less commonly considered. And ultimately, Cardoso, as a director, is not interested in the perpetrators, but the victims. Now for Vazanche, another period piece, is a visually stunning depiction of 1820s Brazil. Directed by Daniela Thomas, a Brazilian filmmaker and multidisciplinary artist, Vazanche tells the story of 12-year-old Beatrice's forced marriage to a slave trader, Antonio. Brazil, a country that is so famous for its vibrancy and nature, is stripped of any color in this film. This juxtaposition of black versus white expertly serves as a visual and textual motif throughout the entire film. An estranged aspect of colonial society that's brought forth in this film is its depictions of childhood, especially girlhood and a coming-of-age story. In Vazanche, Beatrice serves as a witness to the horrors of coming of age in colonial society. It adds a new perspective to this story. Not only were slave owners murderous racists, but as an audience we are horrified from this perverted sexualized perspective from a 12-year-old. In doing so, we are reminded that colonizers were also pedophilic. This further demonstrates the importance of sexual relations in maintaining power and how sex, sexual violence, and rape were critical tools in the colonization effort. Vazanche effectively demonstrates a coming-of-age story in colonial Brazil to remind us of the cruelty of the colonizer, but also to uncover another subaltern perspective. Ultimately, by centering a female perspective, these plots center a distinct narrative and allow colonial history to take on its complex, incestuous, and uncomfortable form in full effect.